Welcome, everybody. Good morning, and happy to present the sixth and final mini series that we've been running on giving amazing conference speeches. Today, we're going to cover a slightly different topic here about how to invite collaboration. And this might not necessarily seem like an obvious topic because you're speaking from the stage, you're speaking from one to many. How can you collaborate with a group of people? So we're going to share some ideas today about how you can move from just presenting data and running through your slides and sort of being that expert from the stage, which is great. People do come there to listen to your content. But how can we really have that two-way conversation, really getting into a sense of co-creation? Why would you want to do that? Well, the main reason is you want to keep people's attention. You really want to have them on your side. And the way to do that is to make them feel a part of the process, to feel that they're collaborating, they're involved in this particular presentation. If you're in a passive mode where you're just pushing data or giving updates, it sounds very stale. It reminds you of sort of those old school assembly halls where, the head teacher is just pushing information. Nobody really enjoys that experience. So unless you're presenting really critical government regulations or some very, very specific technical topic, it's not going to be enough just to present content. How do we get into co-creation? We've got to find purpose. We've got to find a sense of movement and action. And that's what we're going to have a look at in this 30-minute topic today. We've mentioned this before in this series, but it's worth reminding you that engagement, attention, people's focus is the scarce resource. You are constantly battling against people's attention spans, and they have been getting shorter and shorter. It's just so easy to go to the mobile phone, and now they're scrolling and distracted. So how can we overcome that? How do we make them a part of our presentation? So we want them to feel that it's a safe place for them to share. One of the biggest challenges for conference speaking is, how do you get anybody to speak up? It's so difficult. So we can talk about, how do we get voices? There's techniques that you can do there. How do we get people involved? How do we get them feeling like that there's a sense of ownership here? Now, of course, you can do a lot of this before you get on stage. You can, talk to stakeholders. You can talk to people in the audience. You can run polls or surveys if that's a possibility. There is definitely work that you can do. I talk about getting to the venue 24 hours before and getting on the stage and getting comfortable with the room. But you can also use that time to get to know people, talk to people. What are their concerns? What they like to hear on this topic? Really do that first-hand research. That's what we call primary research. Really getting on the ground and understanding what people are interested in. Let's run through our principles today when it comes to inviting collaboration. The first one is about that shared purpose. So we've mentioned this before, that all great leaders, all great speakers have an inner core. They're value driven because that value acts as a magnet to attract people towards you. So why do you want to do this in a conference speech? Again, the more common ground that you can find, the easier it is to have that sense of rapport and empathy. And we can use we rather than I. So, we use this example here from a Jack Ma quotation. We're an internet company. My vision is helping small businesses sell things around the ocean, serving 2 billion consumers. That's the great vision, the great purpose. Then now you can sort of use that purpose, as this is what we're all about, to zoom in to a specific concrete example. So in this example, talking about how, the very successful campaign they ran for Washington cherries. So have a purpose because it gives you that platform. Think of a purpose like a boat, right? You're allowing people to step onto the boat. They're coming onto the boat now. You're going down the river together. Now you can have those conversations when you're on the boat. If you don't have that purpose, some people are still on the docks. They're like, I'm not sure I want to get on that boat. And it's hard to sort of reach that audience as the boat is going away. So that shared purpose is so important. What is that commonality that you can bring to your audience? So one of the shared purposes that I have, I talk on leadership and leadership communication. And one of those purposes is finding your voice, being heard, being understood, Everybody wants to feel like what they say matters, right? You have something important to say. You need to get that out to people. What's your message? What's your voice? That's a sense of a shared purpose, because people would like to know that what they do matters. That's a very important motivator for many people. So find your purpose. Principle number two, you can talk about making the room smarter. So hear that sense of, sharing stories, sort of sharing, that sense of a personal story is really important here. It could be as simple as something you've experienced on the ground just before the conference speech. You can use the examples of, I was talking to David at dinner last night, who's joining the conference today, and here's something he told me about my topic today. So think about how you can use those stories, because you want to use the stories to make an insight, to make a point, but also to deliver your message. So the stories hit the heart, the stories sort of wrap up the message in a digestible form. When you start to tell a story, people tune in. They're like, oh, what's happening with you and David at dinner? That's interesting. That's different. When something is different, that variety, that will get people's attention. And then you can drop in that logic, drop in that data, drop in that statistic. So think about the points that you want to make. It doesn't always have to be you as the expert, the credible authority delivering it. This is what I think, the message should be. It can be other people telling that message as well. So again, going back to that common ground, if someone else delivers a message, then that can be just as powerful as you delivering the same thing. So again, we've talked about stories. We all know that stories are important, but there's different ways that we can do it. We can be quite creative in the way we use stories and anecdotes. And remember, a story can be short. A story could be 45 seconds. It could be 90 seconds. It doesn't have to be 5 or 6 minutes. So good stories just like really hit home, make that point, give insights. The more you can let people come behind the scenes, like open up, oh, here's some client work that I was doing, and here's an insight that I found from that. Here's something when I was talking to this VIP. You're sort of letting people into a new area. You're like, oh, I haven't heard this. I can't find this anywhere else. I can't go to GBT and get this particular story. So that's why you're making the room smarter, because with GBT, people feel like they're much smarter, and they are. They have that accessibility to information. So what's your edge as a speaker? It's your stories. It's your experiences. So get comfortable sharing those. Again, you've got to share them appropriately. You can't reveal confidential information. So there's a boundary there that you've got to get comfortable with. I help people with this, and sort of like just helping people understand where that boundary might be. So talk to me if you do need some coaching on how to do this. But make the room smarter with your stories. Little exercise here. There would be a process that we would run through when we're creating stories for a conference speech, rather than maybe show, because it's good to use charts and statistics. Sometimes there's just too many. You just got too many data points to if you're talking on machine learning or data compliance, your topic is so heavy anyway. Or if you're talking about clinical trials and biotech, that naturally very technically heavy information. So really think about that 30-second story. Can you get it down to 30 seconds? Put people in the picture, quick setup. Get them into the story. What is that one point that you want to make? So if you look at a chart, you look at a table, you look at a research thing, what is the key data point here? What is the big arrow? If I was pointing an arrow to it, what would it be? What would you like people to remember? And then sort of turning that into an ask, what would it take for you to, apply this back to your business? What would it take for you to discover this data point for, your department, engaging, using questions, using connecting questions. So these would be questions where you ask a question. In a way, it's a rhetorical question, or I call them connecting questions, because every time you ask a question, the audience starts thinking about the answer. You don't necessarily want the audience to start calling out the answers, and they won't. If it's a big room, say 100, 200 people, no one's going to call out the answer. In smaller settings, if you're in like a sort of 20, 30 seater, people might engage. They might feel more comfortable there. But the point is not that they shout out the answer, but they start thinking. When they're thinking about the answer, you've got their attention, you've got their focus. Setting the cadence, principle number 3. So again, collaboration, again, from a conference stage, it's quite challenging to have genuine collaboration because, you have that distance between you and the audience. You're not always able to do breakout rooms in a 30-minute or 45-minute keynote presentation. So how do you do that? So we use different collaboration frames. As we talk, I decide, that can be one form of collaboration frame where, you can sort of have people to do a pair and share. That gives people the feeling that they're talking, that they're involved, even though they're not talking to everybody. And then you can sort of go around with a microphone and sort of like gather ideas. Difficult though, because like this does eat into time. If you have like hundreds of people, that this, even just doing a simple turn to your partner and ask one question, this might be a 30-second exercise, but it could take 2 minutes just because of the number of people, and the noise goes up, and then the time to quieten down the audience takes a bit of time. So you really got to think about how you would like that collaboration frame, to exist. You can use technology. You can use word clouds where people scan a code, people put in some answers, and then you can get a word cloud coming up on the screen. That's a sense of we're talking. So we're talking, you'd see that word cloud go up. So you might say, well, what is the current state of your company culture? Or what is, how would you describe the communication style of your CEO? And all those words go up, and it could be inspirational and influential. There might be some negative words in there as well. And you sort of have to see in the word cloud which words come up, and then you decide what to focus on. And you can say, oh, it's interesting that you say that word because this is something we're going to talk about in our presentation later. So using technology is a way. Use those phones. People have the phones in their hands, get them to scan a code, type something in. You have to factor in the timing. It will take a couple of minutes to do something like this. But again, it gives, for that 2 minutes, people are collaborating, they're engaged, they're involved. Now when they want to see, what did other people put up there? So again, we can use technology to our advantage. Again, you've got to test it, make sure it works, make sure it's easy to use, make sure people don't need to log in. You've got to make it super simple, sort of one step to input their ideas. But this can work very well just for you to gather those ideas from the audience. Managing objections for Principle 4 might seem like a strange one to have in there because, well, this is not, you might say this is not really like a client presentation. It's not like a senior leader presentation where I'm going to get lots of questions and interruptions coming to me. This is a conference speech. Sure, but your audience. Your audience are going to have objections to what you're saying. So the way to do this, rather than, traditionally you'd wait till the Q&A to start addressing objections, what we do in our conference speeches is in our content, we surface and resolve objections as we go through the presentation. So what are those sort of like really questions that people are asking? What might they be challenging you? What might they disagree with you in your conference speak? And that's fine. It's fine to have disagreements. Why? Because again, this is very engaging for people. People want to hear, okay, how are you going to do this? So one of my speech topics that I talk on is a leader in name only. And the idea of like, you can have a leader, leader in your title, but you're not actually fulfilling that role. And that, that can be quite challenging for people to, to really think about. And they want to know, what does that actually mean to be a leader in name only? So they have this question, this sort of challenge surfacing up. So the way that you can do that, you can raise the concern through a question. You could say, these are some common questions that people ask in this area. And then you answer the question. You set your context. Again, it's just a chance for you to resolve a particular issue. Maybe you have a story, maybe there's a data point, maybe you link back to your purpose, you link back to your key message, you link back to a case study. Again, it's just about trying to nail down a particular objection and then closing with, okay, well, now let's move on to the next thing. So really think about, in a conference speech, what are going to be the questions that would come up if I heard your presentation? List them out. So we list out our questions. We do our own Q&A as part of the preparation to make sure that we have a good answer for that. Sometimes you might not want to answer the objections. It might come up in the Q&A if you have those. Not every conference speech allows for Q&A. But again, if you want to get that engagement with the audience, put out the questions. If you're not sure what the questions are, Meeting before the meeting. Do that research that I talked about before. Ask people, what's your biggest question on this area? What's the one thing that you disagree with when it comes to this? What's the one frustration that you have in this area? And if you can talk about what those are, and do it in a sort of like a powerful way, people are going to be listening to that. They're going to be engaged. They want to find answers to their problems. So again, managing objections that you bring up can be a very powerful way to not only answer the questions that the audience have, they're going to be listening, but also to give your credibility. It really frames your credibility. This person understands us. This person knows the questions we have. I can kind of see the answer they give. That's quite a good answer, and that really sort of gives your presentation a lot more kudos. Of course, we know that conference speaking, you need to dial up the energy. We've talked about that before. This idea of emotional contagion, if you can sort of like, really build up that energy, get the energy going in the audience is super important. So we've talked about some ideas as we've gone through the presentation today. When you do the word cloud exercise, that's going to bring up energy. You're going to hear a lot of energy in the room. People are scanning and people are like putting answers in. They're turning to their partner and saying, what are you doing? There's going to be a big hum of energy as you go around. I would recommend, if possible, jump down from the stage, have a quick walk around in those 2 minutes, like check in, sort of listen. What are people saying? Are you catching words? Really sort of like do that so that when you come back to the stage after the 2 minutes, you can say, yeah, that was really interesting. I heard some, fun responses. All these word cloud words came up, but some that didn't get on the screen, I heard somebody say this and that was very different. Or I heard somebody mention this idea. And actually, I've got a story about that. So again, that brings up energy. It's engaging for the audience. Again, if you're not a very spontaneous speaker, don't do this. But if you're someone who likes that, playfulness, that spontaneity, that's definitely something that you can build in. Again, you have to build this in. It will look very spontaneous to the audience, but when we're planning your keynote speech, we will build in this. There'll be like a 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute block for that interaction to allow for us to, to build up this energy. You might say, well, look, I'm not using the QR codes and I don't fancy jumping down from the stage. What can I do to get energy going? Every 5 minutes, like try and have, and maybe even fewer than 5 minutes, try and have some form of audience interaction. Can be a question on the screen that they have to think about. Could be a little quiz, answer these 3 questions. Or as you can see on the slide here, a couple of 2 minute trios, or even just turn, pair and share, turn to your partner and ask them this question, or get in groups of 3 and, what's one, how could you apply this idea? This is great towards the end of your presentation. Speakers often miss this opportunity because they've spent too long on their content and they're rushing towards the end, or they're going over time and the organizers are waving a red light at them. Again, if you've planned your presentation well, you want to have that really solid 5 minutes at the end where it's, okay, we've talked about A, B, and C today. What does that look like for you? Turn to your partner. How can you bring this back to your workplace? What's one conversation you need to have this week? Or what's one conversation you need to have today with somebody in your company to make this happen? So get really concrete, get really specific, allow people to really think about their context from here, from this fun conference back to the workplace where I can really put this into practice. So there's many different ways to close this out, but this is a good way just towards the end to get people engaged. They're collaborating, they're thinking about what's important to them. And the funny thing is, although you're not on the stage speaking, they will feel that this is a very engaging presentation, and that you'll see that come up in the feedback comments. Very engaging, very energetic, but you've done it in a way through audience participation. So variety is the key here. You don't want to have these three discussions the same throughout a presentation. You've got to use variety. I've shared a few points there, but there's many different ways that you can do this. Couple of things here that you can do from the stage as you're facilitating this collaboration. If there is a Q&A session, you can have sort of do's and don'ts, set the rules, look, one question at a time. The biggest challenge for conferences is people ramble on and they don't have a question, or they have 3 questions, or they speak for 3 minutes and there's really no question in there. So If you're able to seed some questions, if you're able to talk to people ahead of time to sort of say, look, for the first one or two questions, could I go to you first? And then you sort of like show me what the question should look like, just a really short, hey, one sentence question. That's what you want to try and do as much as possible. If someone does have a really rambling long question, don't make them feel bad. I'm not a big believer in sort of slapping people down from the stage. But look, rephrase the question. So what I'm hearing is, this is your question. Or if they don't even ask a question, like, okay, well, thank you for your observations. Let's move on to the next person. That sort of thing. It's a real challenge. You have to watch your time here. You can really lose time here in your conference speech. You have got to talk to the organizer here in terms of how do I manage my presentation versus the Q&A? Should I build it into my 45 minutes, or is it separate? And make sure you have someone running around the room with microphones so that everybody, including yourself, can hear what the question is, which is pretty important. Try, this again is a good opportunity for you to use anecdotes, use stories, call back to statistics, use humor. You can be a little bit more relaxed. You can sort of be yourself. In the Q&A section, it's designed to be a little bit more interactive. And use the tagline idea, sort of summarizing your idea, summarizing main points at the end of that Q&A. So that's what we talk about, the transition, the one sentence look back and link forward. So that was really good. So we talked about this. Now let's move on to the next part. At the end of a conference speech, it's always good to have a commitment from the audience. Different ways you can do this, but build it into your conference speech. What do you want people to do? Which stakeholder should they talk to? What's one thing they should do? What's that date they should do it by? It should be, within 24 hours, this week, as soon as you get back from the conference speech. What's one message that you can send right after my talk? Really encourage people. This is the call to action, the move to action. This is it's a difficult part of the presentation because people, they're going to be running out to coffee, running out to lunch, they're going to meet somebody. But if you can build this in, really try and have this in. It's kind of like a collaboration contract, if you like. Again, if you can do it, it's very engaging. If you allow people that sort of minutes to write something down or send themselves a message, even record a voice note to themselves, just make it easy for them to really take back. So the idea here, this is the link back, right? You've delivered a great presentation, great message, insightful. There's lots of ideas buzzing around their heads. Now let's zoom in, focus. Let's take that back to my workplace. What does that look like? What is it? Write it down. So just covering up our 5 principles of inviting collaboration today, really moving from that just sort of talking at the audience to really truly co-creating and collaborating with the audience. Why do we want to do that? We want their attention. If they're not listening to us, they're not going to benefit from all the great ideas that we have. So again, going back to purpose, finding common ground in any way. If you've got to look for that common ground, if it's values, if it's purpose, if it's just background. We're all accountants here together. Whatever it is, we're all from the same alumni. We're all from the same country. Find that shared common ground. Make the room smarter with your stories, insights that people can't find on GBT. What is that uniqueness? You've got to dig it out, but you've got to make it digestible. Really hone those stories. Number 3, setting the cadence for collaboration. Using different ways, using technology, using pair and shares. The key thing here is it's got to be, you got to vary it. You got to mix it up. Number 4, managing objections. So getting smart about addressing people's challenging questions before the Q&A. And that will show that you understand your audience. People want to hear those questions. You can name drop if you like, but you don't have to, because if it's a common question, then people will perk up when they hear that. And then number 5, just the energy. Thinking about like the energy management as you go through a conference speech. You want to start high. You want to every 5 minutes sort of give people something different to do, to keep them involved, keep them engaged, and keep their attention. Delivering a conference speech is not easy. It's fun when you get it right, but it can be very challenging. I work with CEOs, with thought leaders, with people who are giving conference speeches to help them hone up their talk. It's not just about standing up and running through PowerPoint slides anymore. Audiences expect a lot more. They're on GBT, ready to challenge you at any moment. So if you're relying too much on information, people are either going to tune out because they're like, I can get this elsewhere, or they're really going to challenge you. They're going to come in with different facts and figures. So scan the code if you'd like to have a chat about improving and really nailing your next conference speech. I love these types of consultations. I love the excitement of a deadline of an event. It's how I started my career doing event management, and having given over 3,650 public speeches virtually and face to face. I just love that live experience, and I'd love to help you, really enjoy that as well. Whether you're a thought leader, a scientist, an engineer, a CEO, be happy to help you. So I look forward to talking to you soon, and wish you best luck in your next conference speech. Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.